Well, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, and fellow members of Engineers Ireland, our guest speakers this evening. Welcome to this evening's event, which, as you know, is the next in our event in our sustainability Grand Tour series. This evening's session we are calling Sustainable Living, and hopefully it'll be an enjoyable session for you all. My name is Barry Hyland, and I'm Chair of Engineers Ireland here in the Northeast, and it's my honour and indeed pleasure to welcome you and to introduce you to the sunny Northeast, where we host this evening's presentation for you. I'll take a couple of minutes now just to run through a few formalities and a few house rules, if that's okay. Firstly, I want to thank you all for coming along this evening. I know you're all very busy staying. We're all busy days and all that. I hope, and I'm sure you will enjoy our speakers and our topic this evening. Two diverse speakers in some ways, but related, and there's a lot of similarities and overlap, and that's the idea behind this evening. I'd like to thank a few people who've made this evening happen. Firstly, the Sustainability Tour Committee, the committee here in the Northeast, and Sinead, who's there in Clyde Road, helping us with the technical issues this evening. So first of all, can I introduce our two wonderful presenters for this evening? Our first speaker is Mr. Anthony Walsh, who I'll call Tony from now on, as he prefers to be called. And Tony is Manager of Future Network Development in ESBN Asset Management. And tonight, Tony will talk to us about the development of the distribution network for electrification of heat and transport. And also, Tony will discuss reinforcement of the distribution network for coping with EVs and HPs, touching on new transformer designs located here in the Northeast region. And also this evening, we're delighted to have our other speaker, our second speaker, Mr. Eamon Dillane, who now runs and owns his own solar consultancy business after many years in industry and in Tara Mines. And for those of you who were part of their energy forum in 2019, you might remember Eamon gave a presentation that evening, which was very well received. So tonight is in some ways a follow on, but obviously a little bit more detail involved. And Eamon will give a case study on empowering homes and future transport. So that's our two speakers this evening, so I'm sure you'll enjoy them. So before I hand over to Tony, just some brief house rules for this evening. If you want to ask a question, put it into the Q&A function on your Zoom screen that you all have there. And if we've time at the end, we will get to as many of those questions as we can. Don't use the chat function to ask any questions. You use the Q&A session, the Q&A function. And if you want to pick a question for a particular speaker, obviously put that person's name at the beginning, either Tony or Eamon. And just to say, Sinead will be recording the presentations. We won't be recording the Q&A piece at the end. So that's really all I have. Just to say, to welcome you all along this evening, and just to hand over now to Tony to take it away. So Tony, I'll hand it over to you now.
Okay, thanks very much. As Barry said, I'm manager distribution of Future Network Development in ESB, and look after how we prepare the networks to cope with the electrification of heat and transport. So our vision basically is to be able to facilitate at least 1 million electric vehicles and at least 600,000 heat pumps on the network by 2030. So as it's Easter week, or was Easter week when I was preparing this, I've taken it as a theme to discuss the theology of networks. So like in the catechism, it's who made the world, or how do we design a housing estate? The catechism and the canon law for deciding on how to make electrification happen. The New Testament of the technology being used, and the trinity of system control that's all-seeing, all-knowing, and omnipotent. And as always, the devil is in the detail, and the choice for us at the end is heaven, hell, or purgatory. So here's how you design a housing scheme. You start off with a unit substation that has transformer and switchgear in it. It takes in high voltage at 10 or 20 kV, steps it down to a usable voltage of 230 volts single phase, 400 volts three phase, and then brings it on cables throughout the housing estate, stopping at junction boxes called mini pillars, which are either green or galvanized boxes you see in front of the junction between two houses. From these mini pillars, which you can see on the right-hand side here in section, you have a vault from which smaller service cables are taken and go to the meter box, which you have in your gable, the sidewall of your house. If we looked at this in a little bit more detail, we'd see that you have, of course, the cables coming out of the unit substation. going to the mini pillars, as I've stated. But if we looked at an overview in schematic form, we can see that generally we try and loop the cables together so that there's a backfeed. And if possible, we try and interconnect one unit sub to the next unit sub so that if there's an outage of one, we have a backfeed to the next. This just makes everything very flexible and easy to deal with. Now, if we put in electric vehicles and heat pumps on this network, potentially we may overload the unit sub or overload the cables, and we also may end up with a voltage drop because of the increased loading. So here's a typical housing scheme. We start with the transformer. We've got the mini pillars, we've got the cable circuit. In fact, we have about 4 cable circuits that come out from the substation. And we design each house to cope with a peak load of 12 kVA, but that's on the assumption that the average load of the remaining houses is 2.5 kVA. However, that changes once you start putting in EVs and heat pumps, because it was based on the statistical summation of multiple small loads. And now you have large loads with long duration that don't sum in the same way. So this means that we could have a transformer overload, we could have a cable overload. And that means we'd have limitations in these circuits. We could also have a low voltage at the end of the network. And that means that that would be due to voltage drop along the cables and across the transformers. So they're the impacts that we have to deal with. And next we come to how would we deal with these? Well, how we deal with them and the choice that we make depends on how we approach the problem. And the way in which we approach the problem is using a common sense type approach that we call real options. So this is quite interesting because it's applicable to any decision you make. And what it really means is that every time you make a decision and you implement it, you've sacrificed the option of taking a different decision. So that means that options have value. And if you were able to delay a big decision until you got more information available, that would have a value. So say your choice was, I want to buy either an electric vehicle or a petrol vehicle. Once you buy either of them, you have made your choice and you can't do anything else. So the idea would be, if you, for instance, were able to rent an electric vehicle, you could try it out. And then with the extra information you got, you could make a more informed choice to go either for an electric vehicle or for a petrol vehicle. So you've bought the option, which costs you money, of renting, so as to defer the purchase decision. Now, if you looked at that at a high level, and most of you have done investment appraisals where you look at the NPV, the net present value of the cash flows, real options just means that you also add in the NPV and the options that are associated with each of those investments. And in practice, these options are common sense ones. So the first one would be a timing option. So with some investments, they allow you to wait for further information so you can make a better decision later, such as renting the electric vehicle. Others are a growth option, because sometimes with investments, you can expand the investment, you can contract the investment. Other investments, they're fixed. You made them and there's nothing you can do. It's either right or wrong. Yet others, you might be able to expand them, or you could contract them, but you can do one, but not both. And finally, you've got the abandon or switch option, which is the ability to halt a project and switch to something else. So some projects might be like, say, putting in a new cable. The investment has no value until it's completely finished and it's been connected. Half a cable in the ground has no value to you. You have no choice. Once you start, you must finish or else it's valueless. So these are the sort of issues you need to deal with. And a practical example would be a large new customer load that requires a new substation to connect it. That's one option. However, if the large customer load doesn't go on, then you just have normal load growth and you'd only need to uprate the existing substation, which is a different investment. And either choice has the risk of being stranded if your expectations are incorrect. So if the new load doesn't come on and you've bought a new substation, you never needed to do that. You just needed to uprate the existing one. But if you uprated the existing one and then found the new load coming on, well, now you have to build a new substation anyway, and you've invested in both, but you didn't need to invest in the uprating of the existing substation. So in such a situation, you'd like to buy a timing option where you buy flexibility so as to delay the decision and make a better decision with greater knowledge and more certainty. So looking at this in a more practical way, we have low growth scenarios and high growth scenarios for electric vehicles and heat pumps. And as these scenarios take place and load goes onto the network, at some stages we'll get a break point on the network where the load exceeds the capability of the network, and we have to put in extra capacity to relieve the strain. And the size of the brown bars here indicates the level of capacity that we're adding. And the duration between solutions is depending on the growth rate. So on the left-hand side of the screen, the growth rate was low. We added in a small amount of capacity. It lasted a long time. On the right-hand side of the screen, we added in a lot of capacity. The growth rate was high, so it ran out very quickly. So you match the solution you have to the growth rate you expect to get. Now, looking at our substation and housing estate again, we have a choice. We have a traditional investment, which means adding or uprating circuits, overhead lines, underground cables. We have flexibility. Now, this often gets confusing. Flexibility is where you change the load either in peak or in timing to match the network capability available. And a very good example is shown here in this little illustration at the top. If you have, say, 200 kilowatts available on a network and a car is 7 kilowatts, that means you can connect 30 cars simultaneously. You can't connect 35, you can connect 30. But that's only if they all charge at the same time. If a car takes 4 hours to charge and you said, I'm going to split the charging up into 4-hour increments, then the same 200 kilowatts could charge 180 cars with no investment on the network. Or you might allow people to charge at, say, 1.5 kilowatts continuously, and then you could charge 200 cars on the same network. Or more practically, you may allow some cars to charge quickly, others to charge slowly, depending on their needs, and you will end up being able to charge more than 30 cars because you're sharing the capacity around. And that just shows you the scope that you can go for. So you can go from 30 to 180 cars on the same piece of network with no investment, provided you control when the cars charge. Smart grid, which you've heard people talk about innumerable times, is really about the assets. So if you change how the asset operates or change how you control the capability of the asset, that gives you something extra. And that might be, for instance, to dynamically rate a piece of equipment. So you may have a substation and it's rated at 400 kVA continuously. But by monitoring the substation, you might say, I can allow this substation increase its load to 480 kVA because I know later on it'll cool down, and I'll dynamically rate it. So now I'll treat that as a 480 kVA transformer, not a 400 kVA transformer. So that's essentially what smart grid is. And finally, we come to advanced system management. So ASM is tomorrow's world. Smart grid is yesterday's world. ASM means you're dynamically matching the load requirements of the customers with the network capabilities in real time. That's why it's so clever. So you're optimizing everything. This is a whole of system approach. So if we look at this, we can see our existing scenarios, we can see the breakpoints, and we can see that our different approaches here are traditional, non-wires, ASM control. And as you can see from the diagrams, as traditional, as non-wires and ASM ramps up, the color gets deeper, traditional ramps down. So new technology obviously takes over from older technology, and obviously you get more bang for your buck at a later stage by controlling than you do by trying to put in extra wires into the ground. With all of these solutions, all go towards making sure that you can match the load to and the capability of the network so that you can connect all these electric vehicles. The catechism of network investment is basically least cost, technically acceptable solutions for probable scenarios. So it has to be economic, it has to work, and it has to be needed. It has to be probable that you need it. So in essence, this means any approach has to be mature enough to be deployed. So it has to be commercially available. The solution must give a payback in a reasonable period. So you don't want to put in something that will take too long to get a payback. You know, if it's going to get a deferral on the network for 5 years and it pays itself back in 4 years, great. If it has a 5-year payback and you only get 1 year's deferral before you need to upgrade the network, it's useless. If it's a new type of solution, its life cycle cost must be less than the traditional solution, obvious, and there must be a legislative basis for the solution to be available. So if I said, I'm going to control when every car and every load in Ireland turns on or off, that would work, but I have no legal basis to do that. Canon law then, if you like, is the tactical issues. So the first one is that investment is lumpy due to high economies of scale. I can put in a 400 kVA transformer in a substation, or I can put in a 630 kVA transformer, and the difference in cost might be maybe 15% for the equipment, but the capacity I'm getting is 50% more. Similarly, in a greenfield development, it's very inexpensive to add capacity. So if we move from 2.5 to 5.5 kilowatts, it costs us maybe 10% extra, even though we've doubled the capacity, because it's greenfield. We're only making marginal extra investments. Similarly, if we've an existing network and we can reinforce it, that's really good value. The issue is it can only be done to a limited extent. So the network wasn't designed to have one component greatly increased in capacity and be able to be offloaded by everything else. But it is possible to do within certain ranges, and it's really good value when you can do that. Another issue that's important to appreciate is that problems are likely to occur in isolated clusters initially. That means that there's no point in trying to have a widespread deployment of a master solution that will cover 100% of everything, when you'll only have a problem in 5%, and you'll never be able to require this solution for maybe another 10 years, at which stage it's technologically obsolete and will need to be replaced anyway. So in the early days, you try and deal with the isolated clusters because that's the cheapest. And similarly, additional capacity means that you increase the scope to use flexibility. So if you have a very congested network and you try to use flexibility, you'd be turning everybody on and off every 5 minutes because there wouldn't be enough capacity to go around. When you add in extra capacity, it means that you only have a congestion maybe once a week, so your restrictions on what you need to do are much less. Coming back again to our growth rates, we can see that traditional solutions such as cable lines and transformers would be either using existing headroom in our existing transformers and networks, incrementally increasing the capacity of existing assets. Then we would move on to non-wire solutions such as flexibility, tariffs, and smart grid, where we'd leverage the existing network capabilities using smart grid and flexibility. We'd change how the cars are charging using smart charging, and we'd alter when they were charging using a tariffs approach. And all of this would be overseen by ASM control, which would dynamically match the network capabilities to the load. So this gives us a whole of system approach. Going back to our network, we can see that if everything is evenly spread, we don't usually have a particular problem. But if it's not evenly spread, then we could have a problem with, say, the transformers. One housing estate has got more purchases of electric vehicles than others. If that's the case, we need to be able to operate the transformer. If the cable in the middle of the network of an existing housing estate is overloaded, our proposed solution is to put in a sidewalk transformer so that we inject capacity into the cables rather than try and dig up the cables and put in bigger cables. If we have a problem at the end of the cable where the voltage drop is too high, well, then we'll make sure that the transformer we put into the substation is a tap changing transformer that can give out a higher voltage. And if we have demand side management facilities so that the grid operator can match load to wind, for instance, and that might overload the network, ASM, Advanced System Management, will make sure that this is controlled so it doesn't become a problem. The new testament, if you like, is our new technology. Our substations are actually built in the Northeast in what used to be called CG in Cavan, and it's now called Kite PowerTech. So we have here a unit substation which is about 2.5 meters by 2.5 meters. It's 11 cubic meters, doesn't require planning permission. The transformer is at the rear of the unit substation. The LV outlets are on the top, on the right-hand side, there where the cables are connected, and the MV cables go in on the left-hand side into the switchgear. Looking, if we took the roof off the transformer, we'd see, off the substation, we'd see the transformer. We've got the MV in red, the LV in black. It's a 630 kVA transformer. If we want to put in more capacity, and this is an existing substation, then we've no room. The transformer would be too big. So we need a transformer that will have a greater power density. And what we did was we found that to get the greater power density and be able to cut off some of the fins so that we could make it larger and yet not overheat the substation, we used a lower loss transformer. So we used copper in the transformer because it has lower losses. We used a vegetable oil, which can operate at a higher temperature, so we have a higher power density, but operating at a higher voltage, a higher temperature in such substations doesn't cause the paper insulation substation to deteriorate. So that 630 kVA transformer can be replaced with one that's also nominally 630, but can be overloaded at peak to 900 kVA for many hours at a time. So it's a very economic solution. And the cost of this is not much more than the cost of the transformer itself. It's maybe another 15, 20%. That's one that we've manufactured in Cavan, and we've got tested and it works. For tap changing, you can see here a diagram of our network. We have voltage drop from the medium voltage bus bar along the MV network across the transformer, and then the residual voltage is on the LV cables coming out of the transformer. So typically, if the upstream network is loaded, we end up with maybe 225 volts on the LV side of the transformer. 207 volts is the lowest voltage we can give you. So that's the voltage drop that's allowed. If you put extra electric vehicles and so on, that voltage drop might be exceeded. However, if we use a tap changing transformer, we can jump the voltage on the output up to 244 volts. And now we've added another 20 volts. We've nearly doubled the voltage drop that we can allow before there's a problem. So this is quite a clever approach. And here's a normal transformer with multiple windings, but with the tap changer added onto the top. This is an electromechanical device made in Germany, quite expensive because they're new, and it basically nearly doubles the cost of the transformer. So we only use it on larger transformers, such as a 1 MVA transformer. But having a 1 MVA transformer with the tap changer means it will not only cope with overloaded situations, it'll cope with overloaded situations where we have voltage as an issue. So you can see in the diagram below, the voltage range over which this operates is much tighter. A sidewalk transformer then is one where we'd like to put it in on the pavement near to where the customers are. And we want to get something similar to an Aircom kiosk. So we're changing the design of the substation. We're getting rid of the switchgear. We're limiting it to 2 outlets. And we've seen similar types of approaches in Tokyo. So this will work. And it means that we don't have to dig as much street if we need to reinforce. I mentioned we doubled the loads on existing greenfield housing estates, and by designing for 5.5 kilowatts, what it means is we need to put in a bigger unit sub, we need 2 extra cables out of the unit sub, and if we do that, we have a 5.5 kilowatt average demand that each customer can take. The cables themselves reduce the voltage drop, but also they reduce losses on the cables. So the savings in losses pays for those cables. And similarly, if we ever needed to increase the size of this unit sub from 630 to 1 MVA, we now have 6 cables at 200 kilowatts a cable. So we have more than enough cable capacity to offload the unit sub. In urban estates, in the outskirts of urban areas, they can still be fed from pole-mounted transformers. These pole-mounted transformers are either the maximum size is 200 kVA. Above that, we've no solution. So we can either put in a second pole mount or we could put in a unit sub. Problem is, where do you find a place to put in a pole? Where do you find a place to put in a unit sub in a mature development? Very difficult. So our solution is to develop a 300 kVA pole-mounted transformer of the same size, dimensions, and of a weight that's okay to fit on the existing pole. So for a 300 uprate of this transformer, we take down the existing one, we put up the new one, and now we've 50% extra capacity for a very small capital cost, and we can do the job in maybe a day and a half. Advanced system management is what we call the all-seeing, all-knowing system, and it's omnipotent. And a colleague of mine, I think Ellen Diskin, is the senior manager who's looking after this project. It not only covers electrification of heat and transport, it also covers the ability of the network to cope with renewables. And it's a very ambitious, well thought through project. And we look at some of the details just now. So this looks like a really complicated diagram because this is a really complicated project, which is true. But if we look at it as all-seeing, all-knowing, and omnipotent, it's easier to understand. So on the left-hand side here, we've LV visibility, okay? That's the all-seeing part. We need to know what's going on the network. Having seen what goes on the network, we need to know what to do. That's the part on the top where we talk about system studies, modeling, dealing with flexibility, okay? And then we need to be omnipotent. We need to be able to control and organize things. That's the operational systems functionality. And effectively, they're the 3 persons in the one God, and the God there is on the right-hand side, which is the overall IT system that oversees all of this. So it's a complicated system. The beauty of it is it leverages everything else you've already done. So whatever investments you make on the network, this makes them more effective and gives us better value. So we're on the second last slide now, and it's about the devil being in the detail. Typically, we know we need to reinforce the network, but we don't know where, we don't know when, and we don't know by how much. So it's difficult to make those decisions. One aid to such a decision is one that we're working with UCD, where we can work out the probability of needing to operate a substation based on the headroom that's there, the number of customers that are available, and how they will use the electric vehicles. And using such a system and knowing that the costs are asymmetric in terms of your investment, because operating a substation just means we're bringing forward work that we were going to do in the future anyway. So it's low cost and it's fairly certain. Operating when we didn't expect to operate is an emergency operate. So it's really expensive. We rush out to do things. We've got contractors working overtime. We're dealing with suboptimal solutions, so it can be very expensive. So there's a sweet spot at which you decide, let's operate, and another sweet spot where you say, no, it's not worthwhile operating. It's very unlikely we'll ever need to operate. That's what this is to tell us. And finally, we're down to the last slide and our choice. It's heaven, hell, or purgatory. And as Father Ted would say, that's an ecumenical question. The choice is ours. Doing nothing will be hell. Doing too little, too slowly will be purgatory. So let's do the right thing now and go for heaven. Electrification of heat and transport is the only way to make a meaningful impact on climate change. The network already exists, the technologies are known, so it's a lower risk than any other approach. At worst, a necessary investment is done too early, but it's never the wrong investment and stranded. It's always of use. And economically, making greater use of an existing network reduces the average costs for all. So it's definitely the way to go. So that was the last slide. I'd like to thank you very much for bearing with me while I went through that. Thanks very much. And I'll return you now to the presenters. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Tony. Tony, that was excellent. We've quite a lot of questions, but as I said earlier, we'll get to them after Eamon's piece, and I'll hand straight over to Eamon. Can I introduce Eamon Dillane? And Eamon, you take it away there. Thank you.
Yep, certainly. Let me just get my screen up for you, please. Here we go. I hope. Can you see that, Barry? I hope I've got a screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Let me go back here. Sorry. Start the slideshow. I'm in the middle, but here we go.
Yep.
So again, good evening, everybody. I'm going to take you through my journey, which started back in 2016 through to practically today on empowering homes and future transport. You're going to get a look through my own solar PV microgeneration system and the various electric cars that I've gone through to date. So without further ado, you don't need to know too much more about me. I've been introduced very nicely by Barry. So basically the project started back in 2016 on my own house. We had just put up an extension a year or two before that where there was a garage, and I had an available wall on the back of the house in which I decided I would mount a solar PV array. In order to do that, I had a certain amount of vegetation I needed to take away. It was gone a little bit overgrown, so it was an opportunity to tidy up. So what you're going to see here is, first of all, I removed the shrubs, vegetation and tree roots all got removed. I installed this hinge frame system, which basically takes four 250 watt solar panels, giving me a total load of about 80 kilos. My garden is facing southwesterly. And what you can also see here is I suffer from some shading coming from my neighbor's house up here in the top right-hand corner of the photo. At the same time as starting this, there is an NC6 notification to ESB networks. They have a 20-day waiting period for that. And what you're doing is you're sending them in data of what you're about to put in, and you're giving them the information in relation to the inverter type, including its type test certificate, to make sure that it's suitable and acceptable for connection to the grid, and it satisfies all of the grid code. So where I went from here, this was a piecemeal job. We were doing it over the weekends. The days weren't very long. And so by Valentine's Day, I had my frame network system installed. And then I popped up my first solar panel, which was followed very quickly by 7 more. So you can see here each of the frames. The frame basically holds 4 panels and giving me a kilowatt. So I had 2 kilowatts installed at that time. And you can see briefly here that I'll just go back very quickly. The frame system can be adjusted then on a month-by-month basis so that I can get an optimum angle to the sun and increase my solar production. That was the next day following Valentine's evening out. And as you can see a little bit here on the right-hand side of this, I've got shading coming in from the house next door. And we're going to talk about that now in a moment. And again, just a garden bush here beside it causing me a little bit of shading. This is a few months further on when I completed the landscaping. You can see all my panels sitting up here at a certain angle, which I've calculated to be the optimum one for gaining maximum from the sun. You can see here a little fella, Coda's his name. It's obligatory almost if you're going to install your own either ground mount or system similar to mine, that he's quite short so he's not causing any shading over the panels themselves. And you can see my garden bush here that causes me some problems. Just very quickly, notes down the left here, I've got 16 250 watt panels giving me a 4 kilowatt peak. That's the DC peak output. Now I have a local transformer, which is literally, I'm on the edge of the town. So it's actually a 100 kVA pole mounted 3-phase transformer, literally behind my garden. And we're the only solar panel on that at present. But it's worth noting that the maximum size of connected equipment that can be put onto the network is 6 kilowatt max. So that's the inverter rating maximum that can be connected to the grid. So it's backing in a little bit to what Tony was speaking about, whereby we don't want to have the capacity to overload the grid, in the reverse direction, whereby if there were 10 systems all with 6 kilowatt, peak summertime, all generating, we could actually backfeed onto the grid and cause more problems. So ESB will be monitoring that with the NC6 application forms. So a little bit of a look behind the system. You can see here in the left-hand photograph, I'm just showing you my framework system. I have a push bar here that I just undo 2 wing nuts, lift it up, push it out maybe 100 millimeters into the next position, drop it back down, and that adjusts the angle for my solar PV. I'm literally just mounted off on a proprietary bracket here on a hinge system. I added a couple of stability rods because I was projecting above the pivot point a little bit and getting a southwesterly wind from time to time. I just did that for stability. And here on the wall, you can see my inverter. That's taking the DC cable through a DC isolator, converting it to AC. There's an isolator on the other side of that, and it drops down into my distribution board. Over here on the right-hand side, this is a black box known as a power optimizer. These go hand in hand with this particular inverter. I use Solar Edge, and these are Solar Edge optimizers. What they do for the system is you're looking at the back of a panel here, and there are 2 leads coming off that you can see plugged into the optimizer. Normally, the output voltage from a typical solar PV panel is in the range around 37 to 40 volts DC. But once it's plugged into this optimizer, the other 2 leads that you can see coming out of it, one is going left, one is going right, and that's plugged into the panels either side, and they're all connected in series. However, once the optimizer is just connected, all the voltage that's coming out from these 2 leads is just 1 volt DC at that moment in time. And it leaves it very, very safe from an installation perspective. Because if you imagine I've got 16 panels on my system, if I connected 16 of them in series with 40 volts coming out, I'd have 640 volts DC to handle at the end of my lead. Sorry, again, just going to flick back very quickly to that. However, with this system, I only have 16 volts DC to handle until such time as it's connected to the inverter, and the inverter wakes up the optimizers and it chooses that it wants actually 350 volts DC to be its operating voltage. So I'll just move on now because I want to talk a little bit about optimizers, what they are and why I have them. On the left here, you can see a snapshot of one of my months in the early days when the system was put in, showing the power produced per panel on that particular month. I mentioned that I am suffering from shading from my neighbor in the bottom corner. So that particular year or that particular month, I only produced 33.61 kilowatt hours in the bottom panel. However, up top, I was producing nearly 56 kilowatt hours. So it's also just worth noting this bottom row of panels are 245 watt, the top row are 250 watt. But if I've got no optimizers fitted, it would only result in me producing 33.61 kilowatt hours. So if I had no optimizers and I was just in a series loop, that's the maximum I would get out of all of the panels. It's also worth noting that with optimizers, you get peak power. You can monitor them individually, and they offer this safe DC off feature. So once the power is removed from the AC coming into the house. The maximum I will have is 37 volts on any panel, and the maximum I'll have in my DC string is 16 volts DC. Very, very good, very, very safe system. So what do I get? What data do I have from the system? SolarEdge offers a 25-year free or included when you buy their equipment monitoring on their website. So I have an app on my phone. What I'm showing you here on the left-hand side is my solar production from the 15th of April last year. And you can see it's almost a perfect bell curve. I produced 21.37 kilowatt hours on that particular day. So over 21 units of electricity. I just popped in the whole of the month of April for last year because I deemed that to be the start of the walking season due to our friend COVID being around. And you can see quite a number of days I was up close and above 20 kilowatts. And it was only one day, I think on the 26th, where we dipped down. That was either very cloudy or it could have even been wet. But you get an idea of what you can produce from the system. April last year was a particularly good month. Also, just a little note here. So far, the system has CO2 emissions saved, whoops, sorry, I have to pop back again, of just over 6,000 kilograms, or I've planted the equivalent of a small copse of trees with about 183 trees. So I like that. It's part of the sustainability end of it. It's not just electricity, you are making a real difference. Okay, system has been installed since 2016. So again, curiosity factor, how has it performed? What has it given us? So if you look at month on month, you can see here, they're all pretty stable year on year. It does vary a little bit across through the summertime. However, 2016, when I put it in March, I had 2.86 megawatt hours produced, a 3.14, again 2.86, 3.12, 3.19. It's pretty stable in around 3 megawatt hours. So far to date, I've done over 15, about 2,825 euros worth of electricity produced, and that was what, 600 or 550, 600 euros worth per year. Home consumption of the solar power. So we put it in, we need to use it. However, we're not always there. You might say, okay, you know, not all your appliances are on all of the time. So how do you get around this problem? I discovered that I was exporting just over 70% of what I was producing, and that was back in March of 2016. So what I did was I purchased a device called an Emerson. You can see it here in the top left corner. And it is literally a surplus power diverter. I popped it up on the kitchen wall, which was great for the family because everybody could see what was actually going on at any given time. It was a decision maker. When is there energy coming in from the grid? When is there energy coming in from the sun? Have I got a happy house, as I'm showing you here in the center? Am I putting energy into my immersion heater? So I was diverting the power that was been lost, as I felt, back out to the grid. However, I was still diverting about 30% even with that. So I invested then in an old-fashioned storage heater for the purpose of gaining that extra little bit of energy and using it. Batteries at that moment in time were still pretty expensive, and I didn't feel it was worth the investment. So the storage heater, it has to be an old type because this particular unit operates on variable voltage, and it only works with resistive load. So you can't put it into something electronic or you'll damage it. Emerson, just by the way, has also been superseded by a device called an Eddy. I've upgraded it 2 years ago now because you'll see I have put in a battery storage system, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So for anybody that's interested, obviously there's an option for solar PV grants at the moment. So we'll run through just the basic terms and conditions first. Your house must be built and occupied pre-2011. You need a BER cert of C after the installation, so there's a bit of a cost associated with that. Then you must use SCI approved installers, and there's no planning if your roof coverage is less than 12 square meters, which is about 6 or 7 panels, or 50% of the total roof coverage, whichever is the lesser. If you're doing a ground mount array, you must leave 25 square meters to the side or the rear of your house thereafter. So what do you get from it? You're offered at the moment €900 per kilowatt hour up to 2 kilowatt peak, so that's €1,800. They offer you a further €300 per kilowatt peak up to 4, so that's another €600, and they're offering €600 for a battery. So you'll see it advertised out there as up to €3,000 available in grants. The cost of solar PV installations. Everybody wants to know how much does it cost. The general question is how much is it for a semi-detached? Now, there's many factors that affect the installation of a solar PV system, but I did scan the internet to find 2 suppliers just to give you some basic information. So the first one that's popping up here is Electric Ireland. Their website if you just go onto it and pop in solar PV, you'll see that they're offering a 6-panel installation, which is a 2 kilowatt peak with a diverter for your immersion heater from now €5,200, euro, including VAT. You do need a BER survey, which is going to be 350, not included. And you have to satisfy the previous items mentioned, but you will get a 1,800 grant. I'm putting a shout out to a local supplier in County Louth, Lennon Solar. Again, they're offering 8-panel installation, 2.4 kilowatt peak with a diverter for immersion heater. It's €6,000, including that. I know the chap, Bernard Lennon, he basically takes the rough with the smooth. If your house is a little bit awkward, it doesn't matter. If he's quoting you €6,000, that's what you're going to pay. And again, you'll need a BER cert. Some further reference information for you if you want to look further. I found Citizens Information very good for the housing grants and schemes. Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, superb website. Go to scai.ie. You can download all of these documents to ensure compliant installations. Solar PV scheme guide, your code of practice for solar PV grant, your solar PV checklist. You can basically find out everything you need to know about putting on a solar PV system on your house, and you can run it through, check it through with whoever's going to carry out the installation, and you'll also know the questions to ask and hopefully get the answers. I'm also mentioning Solar Edge here. They've done the inverters and optimizers. They've superb safety features, fantastic web hosting, superb support, and what I love as well, superb documentation. So they're at solaredge.com. Okay, that's the solar. So we're going to talk a little bit now about electric cars, and these are BEVs, as I found out, they're battery electric vehicles. No engines involved, purely batteries. So I'm going to just take you through my journey to date and where I went to. Okay, we're going to pop up a load of questions here because this is what got me going on it. What's the cost per kilowatt? What's the available range? How do I charge it? Where? Time? What's the battery technology? What's the drive? What's the motor technology? I'm into that type of thing. What's the warranty on the car battery? How is the battery affected by maybe seasonal temperatures? How can I use home produced solar power in the car? Can I use heaters in the car? Will I still get where I want to? What's the price of a car? What are the available grants? Any rebate on the car tax? Then the general public, once I started to own one, they come and would see me. How long does it take to charge? How far will it go? How long will the battery last? Is it any faster than the Father Ted milk float? That's another reference to the Speed episode where Dougal gets stuck in the milk float. How much does it cost to run? We're gonna go into that in a little bit of detail. How much was the Kona? Sorry, just gonna flip back here, sorry. How much was the car? So a Kona 64 kilowatt was 38,000 after the rebates at the time. Not quite sure what it is now, but the rebates available at the time were 5 and 5, which I believe are still available. And your car tax is €120 per year. And that's on all EVs at the moment, regardless of what they are. So my first experience with an electric car, August 2018, I purchased a 24 kilowatt hour Leaf. Again, it was a 151 reg, so it was a few years old. I wanted to gain real experience and data on it. I had done a test drive on the newer Nissan, but I couldn't do a deal at the garage, so I said, right, it's time to learn. Battery capacity remaining 19 kilowatt hours, giving me a range of about, sorry about this, I have to just pop back again, giving me a range of about, where's it gone? A range of about 120 kilometers, but that was with a lot of regen, which means a lot of downhill journeys, adding energy back into your battery. Onboard charger, 3.3 kilowatts, takes about 7 hours at either an ESB car charger or your home charger. Fast charge time is about 50 minutes. They're typically found on the motorways, large towns. I noticed a new one over there recently in Kells. 80 kilowatt motor, very nippy, very poor. Leg warmers was going on my Christmas wish list. Daily commute was about 90 kilometers. But so with a range of 120, I didn't have a whole lot to spare. And in cold weather, there was a noticeable drop in the range. So range anxiety was really a definite factor. But if you're one of these people that go around with sort of a tank of petrol, never too full, or you don't mind letting it run empty, it's okay. But you do never want to see a sign that says road closed or diversion ahead. Now, so what happened next? November 2018, we took a test drive, both myself and my wife, in Kona Electric. And I very quickly sold the 2015 Nissan. It went to a very good home dealer, in fact, over in Trim, came over and bought it. He's into EVs, very good guy. And we got the cars just in January, and range is, sorry, battery capacity, 64 kilowatt hours, a big change. So that was giving us a range in the region of 450 kilometers, sorry. And that runs up to 500 kilometers maximum in the summertime. That's what my wife has managed to charge hers to. Actual winter range, about 400 kilometers. I noticed my wife's charged to 412 this morning. So more fuel. We need an onboard charge of 7.3 kilowatts in this one, which takes about 9 to 10 hours at either on-street charger or the home charger. So it's a simple maths, 9 sevens are 63, so there or thereabouts. Our fast charge time again is 55 to 65 minutes if you're at a fast charger. This has a 150 kilowatt motor driving the front wheels with a permanent magnet motor. Superb motor, highly efficient, very fast. Would actually tear the front tires off it if you weren't careful taking off. Heated front seats and a heat pump. No need for the leg warmers, superb heating in this. Battery management for heating and cooling. And sorry, I just want to flick back for the very last one. The energy consumption for this is about 6 kilometers per kilowatt hour. And if you just remember that, we're going to come across that now in a few minutes. Okay, so the last of my automobiles at the moment. I couldn't resist this one, I'm afraid. It's Tesla Model S P90D. So when COVID struck last year, I decided it was time for semi-retirement. And therefore I traded in the 2019 Kona. I went back to the 2015 Tesla Model S P90D. Battery capacity 90 kilowatt hours, steady range 380 kilometers, which you might say, whoa, hang on, you've gone up by nearly 30 kilowatt hours, but you're not getting a tremendous range. That's for two reasons, performance and all-wheel drive. Large motor between the front wheels and a much larger one between the back wheels. So I'm carrying around a lot of weight with the battery, and it's also a much bigger sedan. We're talking about in the region of about 2 ton. Sorry, yes, just over 2. The onboard charger for this is a 22 kilowatt 3-phase, which is superb because it means if I call into a small town, I can put 100 kilometers per hour into that on an on-street charger. When I'm at home, I'm at 7 kilowatts. So it obviously takes quite a while to charge it at home. Tesla supercharger for this car, I can go from 20 to 80% in about 50 minutes. And as it transpires, that's free for me. And I have one about 20 minutes away, which is ideal. It's to do with the age of the car. The latter ones, the newer ones, you don't get free Tesla charging. So as I said, I'm carrying around a lot of energy, 578 kilowatts driving the car, 777 horsepower, and it's front and rear wheel drive. Heated front seats and the heat pump. Heat pump, not quite as good as the Kona, but it is adequate. I'm heating a much bigger space. Again, I've got battery management, heat and cool, and my energy consumption for this is about 4.5 kilometers per kilowatt hour. But I have noticed with this particular car that it does consume about 10 kilowatts per day when it's parked up. Part of its management system, part of its security detection systems and so forth. So it's using a bit of energy just while it's sitting on the drive. So where are we? Oh yeah, the famous cost. How much does it cost? So cost to travel 20,000 kilometers or 400 kilometers a week or thereabouts. If we're doing it on the basis of the Kona, that's at 6 kilometers average per kilowatt hour, that just needs a bit over 3,000 kilowatt hours per year. At the current day rate I pay, that would cost €709 to drive that car 20,000 kilometers, or working it down, about 60 a month, €14 a week. Just to point out, the service costs are very small. There's no engine to service, they're mainly regenerative braking. And in fact, we got my wife's car service yesterday. It needed a pollen filter changed. That was it. And swap the wheels around. However, there's a better way to charge it, and it would also help the actual grid. Do it on night rate. So we still have the same top figures. However, we're now paying 10.49 cents, including VAT, per unit of electricity. And I'm including the €50 that you pay extra for the premium of having the night rate electricity. So it's costing about 400 a year. So monthly cost 33 or €8 a week to run the car. At the time, there was no chance to switch to night rate. There is a penalty if you want to go back, but I never see us ever going back. And it's worth pointing out that with the smart meter rollout, there are new tariffs. I noticed Electric Ireland advertising a Home Electric Plus, which means between 2 and 4 a.m. electricity is at 5 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's an incentive for you to use those hours to charge your car. But just bear in mind, you will only put in the amount of energy that the charger can, that the car charger can take. So in Moya's car, it's 7.3 kilowatts hour or kilowatts. So I can only put in 14 units in that given time. The rest of it would be using the remaining night rate. So if I want to go back now just to the home solar production that I have, again, sorry, I've just gone a little bit too fast. I'm producing about 3,000 kilowatt hours per year. So how can I maximize it and how can I get it into the car? This gives us first challenges. The car's not always home during daylight hours all the time. It was a lot more during COVID and is generally at the moment, but the solar generation is variable and you're not always sufficient to charge the car all by itself. The car onboard charger 7.3, which you can adjust down, but it would typically only go down to about 4 kilowatts. And solar PV array is, in my case, a maximum of 3.6 kilowatts out on the AC side. The rewards are doing, the car's operating from natural home produced power. That's our target. The car can use a 1 or 2 kilowatt granny charger as it comes. That generally comes with the car to get you out of trouble when you just want to plug it into a standard socket. And that means you're putting a fixed rate into it. So if you knew the sun was up, you could plug that in and it could charge away. Or you can install a Zappi or an equivalent charger to maximize the solar power to the car, which is effectively what I've done. You supplement the solar power with night rate electricity, and then you can share the power with the house. That also worked pretty well for us as well. The solution I have adopted, I mentioned very briefly earlier, that I did install 2 years ago. I decided I was going to put in my own home battery storage system. So what you're looking at here is, this is a 6.3 kilowatt hour battery, and the one sitting beside it is 6.3. So, and I do have the option to double that up again in the future. On the right here is the inverter, which converts the battery voltage back to AC. And what I generally do at the moment, over the winter time, I would charge it overnight, use it during the day. In the summertime, charging it up all day, using it then through the house, or I can opt to put it into the car if I wish. This is just a quick snap of what I've got available. Again, in data available from that, I can see my battery charge on my phone. I know exactly what's going on. And you can see so far I've passed 4,830 kilowatt hours since the 2nd of March through. I think we're actually down to the last slide now, so I can slow down a little bit. And this is home charging of the e-car. What you're looking at here is basically the setup that I have in my house at this point in time. We have the supply grid coming in from the left-hand side through the electricity meter into my consumer unit. On the right-hand side, I've got my PV array coming through my inverter, again, just through a meter into my consumer unit. I've got my AC battery hanging off also the consumer unit. And I've got my device, which was shown on the diagram as an Emerson, but I've replaced it with an eddy. And that is putting my excess power, I can put it into my hot water tank. The second element, I haven't got it in my tank, I've got it sitting down here in a storage heater. And I then have the option to charge using this charger known as a Zappi. With these little blue devices, they're current transformers that are sitting on the incoming supply or on the battery supply. So the whole system works seamlessly to either heat my water, charge my battery, I can choose what I wanted to do, and then surplus going out to my Zappi to charge the car. The Zappi again is eco. You have a few modes on it. You could do a fast charge if you need to. You can do it with the sun on its own, or you can do it with the sun supplementing. So this is the optimum, I think, for what you ideally need. And as the screen has popped me onto my last slide, I'm going to thank you for your time. And I'll hand you back now, if that's okay, to Barry to take us through maybe a few questions.
I'll close it off now. Just a few closing words. First of all, thank you both, Tony and Eamon. Wonderful presentations, I'm sure, and I hope everybody really enjoyed tonight. Thank you, Tony, for sparing the time, and thank you, Eamon, for sharing your lifestyle again. Really appreciate all that. For everybody else on the call, just to say there are 4 more sessions in the Sustainability Tour scheduled at the moment, and you can get more details on it through your Engaged newsletter or on the Engineers Ireland website. Briefly there, on the 14th of April, the Midlands region doing Sustainable Energy Communities and Engineering Master Plan Studies. The 21st, the Northern region are doing hydrogen-powered boats, which sounds very interesting. The 28th of the 4th, Roads and Transportation Society are doing Optimizing Sustainability through reallocation of road space. And on the 5th of May, the West Region and ECAD are doing Protecting the Biodiversity and the Role of Engineers. That's really all we have time for tonight. Again, final thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone who helped set this up tonight. Thank you to our presenters, Tony and Eamon. Thank you to you all for joining us. Hope you really enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you all again at the next sustainability session. Thank you and good evening and goodbye, everybody.